church on Sunday morning. And so actually when we got to the plaza, it was like, oh, well, look what's going on here. And somebody said, there's other things to see in San Jose, but, you know, we were OCU, so we stayed. And had a good time. And by the way, the whole next week there were these news stories on the local TV stations about legislation that is being introduced next month into the Parliament of Costa Rica, guaranteeing the right to employment for LGBT people. So, even Costa Rica is ahead of Oklahoma. But then who isn't, right? The Spirit of Truth and the Unknown God. One of the images that I was thinking of the last couple of weeks, being in Costa Rica and dealing with the issues of social change that we were learning about there, and keeping up with the tornadoes here and the politics here, was an old Buddhist image of the calm rider in the midst of a wild ride. And it reminded me of this idea of the Spirit of Truth that each of us is promised, that we're promised as individuals and as church. So, what is that wild ride? Well, obviously, the tornadoes that did so much destruction across Oklahoma, Missouri, and Arkansas. Had a cousin in Joplin who lost his house. The wild ride is also, of course, the response of a certain group of people in Congress who decided not to provide the funds for recovery for Missouri and Oklahoma until alternative energy programs are sourced. We know what it's like living in Oklahoma, living in the midst of a wild ride with Sally Kern, or State Question 755, or that whole attitude that is part of living in the bubble of the Bible Belt, which is about ignorance and fear of other people based on their color, or their sexual orientation, or their religion. It's all about fear of the other, fear of the unknown. We live in a culture, a national culture, which witnessed a rash of youth suicides among GLBT youth last fall. In the UCC, our denomination, this is Rural Life Sunday. And come to think of it, we often just forget small towns and communities where our food is produced. And often the economic downturn that all of us are suffering from in various ways has impacted those smaller communities even worse than it has impacted places like Oklahoma City. One of the things that I was forwarded by email last week from a friend was about the superintendent of schools in Ithaca, Michigan. In Michigan, their new Tea Party legislature has drastically cut funding for social services, of course, and health care for poor people and public schools by something like 15%. And the money that could have been spent on the schools was transferred over to building new prisons. Kind of foreboding. Well, the superintendent of schools in Ithaca came up with a rather Swiftian proposal. He wrote the governor and published the letter to the governor in the two papers in Detroit and said that he would like the governor and the state legislature to recognize his school district as a prison, because with the funding for the schools being cut, they would have to fire their librarian, and they would have to fire their nurse. They would no longer be able to have the before school breakfast program, conversation with the Athenians, what he's telling them is, who is this unknown God? It is the God of their experience that they don't yet have a name for. It is a God that it symbolizes the divine that they don't quite know how to pin down, if you will. But it is still a sense of the divine that is based on who they are as human beings. I think that's an important soliloquy about the presence of the Spirit and the tenacious